And welcome to another edition of Quarantine Q&A, and it's proudly presented by Alabama One Credit Union. They've been voted Tuscaloosa's best credit union and best mortgage lender. Alabama One offers low-rate auto, mortgage, and business loans, plus protection for it all with Alabama One Insurance. You can visit any of their 9 local branches or check them out online at alabama1.org. Alabama One, a proud supporter of Crimson Tide Athletics. This is Roger Hoover, glad to welcome you back to the Crimson Tide Sports Network, and today we're talking to a member of the Fox Sports family with somebody that knows the capstone very, very well. He is Tim Brando of Fox Sports, longtime work at CBS and Jefferson Pilot as well. Timmy B, it's great to see you. How's everything going?
Good, Roger. Great to be with you again. Hope maybe some things change by the time we talk again, whenever that is.
No doubt. We're talking on July 17th, and as Greg Sankey mentioned earlier in the week in some comments on the Paul Feinbaum show and in some different articles as well, we are really entering into 2 of the biggest weeks in college football history right now because, as you mentioned to me just before we came on, we've got to start seeing some numbers go down.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, Roger, some of the things that you're doing and a lot of other young broadcasters are doing with podcasts and blogs and whatnot, I think it's so vital right now because mainstream media is doing a pretty bad job of reporting on what's going on. Now, some would say, well, nothing is going on. Well, no, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on for these conferences to make the decisions that they're making. Now, I will give a lot of credit to some of the websites out there. The Athletic probably at the top of that list. And a few others that are doing a good job of trying to keep us up to speed on this contingency or that contingency, what the discussions are in these meetings that athletic directors are having with the commissioners. I thought the piece that the young man John Talty did in Alabama.com was very comprehensive today. There's just not a lot out there. If you turn on ESPN or you turn on FS1, you're really not getting it. Now, if you turn on Feinbaum, you will over on the SEC network. But he wasn't on for 2 weeks. They didn't even have his show on for 2 weeks. And the Big Ten network was the beneficiary when that decision came down. I thought Dave Repson and Mike Hall and those guys did a really wonderful job of covering why the Big Ten decided to make the decision it did last week, and then the Pac-12 just as sure as the sun will set over the St. Gabriel's on New Year's Day on a game that really shouldn't be happening, a playoff game should. The Pac-12 will follow the Big Ten, so that's what they did. But what I'm trying to say is, thank God for guys like you and John Talty and these digital websites that are, doing what they can with the people they have to cover what's going on. Because, I don't know too many people that really aren't just going nuts for information on where we are, why we're where we are, and how are we going to get to where we want to go with college football. And amazingly, the companies that carry the most aren't reporting on it, not to the extent that everyone else is. So thanks to you and a lot of other people.
Well, and you mentioned the Big Ten decision, and we were so used to everybody in the Power 5 conferences being in lockstep with all these decisions, even going back to the basketball tournaments, and you were the last college basketball broadcaster for the entire season with the work you were doing covering the Big East on Fox Sports. Are you surprised that the Big Ten did have their announcement before other conferences were willing to make a similar announcement?
I'm surprised that given all of the rhetoric about collegiality and how we were Zooming every Monday with our brethren at other conferences, that they would make that one of the conferences would surprise the other 4, frankly. But if one were to do that, it was going to be the Big Ten. Historically, the Big Ten has always taken the lead on such matters. And I'm not being critical of the Big Ten. I think they decided, and this is kind of goes back to, what I believe is the biggest problem intercollegiate athletics faces, It's something that I've been pounding the pavement on long before you were old enough to turn on a computer. All right, to do what you're doing now. We need one voice. We need a czar for college football. I noticed Mac Brown picked up on my tip yesterday when he was visiting with Paul. Um, because all of these conferences run themselves and they are operating with only their constituencies in mind, the Big Ten decided to do what they felt they needed to do to make sure that their protocols and only their protocols would be in place for every game that they play. They don't have to worry about calling Oregon to find out if they're going to do the same things in Eugene that they're doing in Columbus, Ohio, preparatory to that game. And I think that they just wanted to, for lack of a better term, manage themselves because they could not deal with the risk factor in trying to help manage others. They wanted to manage themselves. They went inclusive for themselves, and in effect threw the MAC under the bus. I mean, the Mid America Conference has 12 games scheduled with them, but as I understand it, through the different contractual clauses and with the relationships that go back so many years, John Steinbrecher, the commissioner of that league, is okay with it, and the Mid America Conference will be, from a physical standpoint, in good shape, with the understanding the Big Ten has a war chest that's pretty big, and so they'll be all right. And so, with that in mind, I don't have any criticism of the Big Ten, but I'm just pointing out that this illustrates what I've always said, and that is there'll never be unison, there'll never be uniformity and stability in decision making, okay, as long as this current infrastructure is what's in place. We just don't have a system that will make for unified decision making. And that's what's sorely missing in college football. And it's why it becomes such a target for major media. And you're beginning to see that now. The politicizing of the decision making process over the next 2.5 to 3 weeks is already taking place. There are some well-intentioned sports writers that are now already casting blame. You know, you can put it at the doorstep of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue now. You know, it was only a matter of time before that came out. Now, not all of the sports media is trying to do that, but some are. That's happening. And I guarantee you, those outside sports media, in the news media, are going to target college athletics because college athletics has no defense mechanism. Adam Silver is the commissioner of a league that a number of outlets are heavily invested in, and you know who they are, the primary one. The NFL is invested in virtually every network, okay? No one's going to go after Roger Goodell, no one. And Rob Manfred, for all the problems baseball had for weeks, that was immediately gone the moment they said, okay, we're starting here. July 23rd, we're going to play, end of story. College athletics is its own worst enemy because it does not govern itself in a manner that they can defend themselves. And so on every front, if we don't take away from this period, years from now, we'll be talking about COVID-19 and how it impacted intercollegiate athletics. I'm fearful that it will be a negative piece, that it will be a piece of history that we look back on in a negative way. But it could be positive if our leadership looks at themselves in the mirror and says, you know what, we had some good plans for what we were doing. We should have shared them with our brethren. And maybe we need somebody to help us coordinate what our plans are so that perhaps we can all do the same thing, operate with the same guidelines, whether we're in the Pac-12, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, or the ACC. This can be done. There's no reason for it not to be done. And then and only then will college football put itself in a position where it's not the national whipping boy for everything wrong with sports, because now it is the one that's going to be, I mean, like a pincushion. They're just poking holes after holes after hole in college football's leadership. Uh, the NCAA, I mean, it's easy to rip Mark Emmert. Paul went after him this morning. I get it. Easy target. I don't disagree with anything Paul had to say. But the truth of the matter is Mark Emmert he's only got a seat at the table. He has no jurisdiction over whether college football is played. And what happens is fans and some media think the NCAA does. I mean, the NCAA wants to make itself look important with football, but it's not. The NCAA sanctions bowl games and acts as a policing agency for infractions, NCAA infractions that can hurt said institution. By the way, they do a pretty poor job of that. Yahoo Sports does a better job of policing intercollegiate athletics than the NCAA does. So they should not be a part. They aren't really a part of college football. College basketball is their domain. They effectively screwed that up by not communicating with the commissioners of the conferences that week in March, when they made the grandiose statement that they were going to have a tournament without fans on the very day that 19 tournaments were about to begin, with doors opening everywhere around the country. So the lack of communication, the lack of transparency has been there between the NCAA and the conferences for some time. I think a lot of the leaders of the conferences are frankly fed up with the NCAA. But the problem is they're now financially in a vulnerable position, and they need the NCAA tournament money. They already lost $1 billion this past year. So that's the one thing the NCAA has that keeps it viable right now with all of these institutions across the country.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think fans are used to seeing you with your top 10 lists or different top 5, things like that. If you were to create a short list of people you would like to nominate to be either, say, the commissioner, the president, the czar, whatever you want to call it, of college football, who would some of those people be?
Well, let me be the first to say that my agenda for having a college football commissioner was not to anoint myself.
Right.
Okay? I see that a lot on Twitter. I am not qualified. I want no part of it. Okay. I'm here to call ball games, and that's that. And I will give some opinions from time to time. I think everyone knows that. But I have the short list. We'll go from 3 to 1. Okay. 3, I go with Billy Payne, former head chairman of Augusta National. What he did to bring the Masters into the 21st century was pretty amazing. Prior to that, he ran the Olympics in '96 in Atlanta, a former Georgia Bulldog and a guy that's well respected everywhere. Number 2, Jack Ford, former prosecutor of note, lifelong member of the National Football Foundation. He played defensive back for Yale, graduate of '72. He's been involved in journalism in many, many ways, made a huge name for himself covering the O.J. trial for what was at that time, I think, a television network that Turner owned that was all about legalese.
Court
and
TV.
Then he was later hired by Good Morning America for, I think, first the Today Show and then Good Morning America. Jack's as solid a guy as I've ever met. Understands, as I said, law and also NCAA law to some extent, if you want to call it that. He would be also a perfect choice. But the one that is the best and the most available, and you could look at his qualifications both as a player, as an administrator, and as a current leader, is Oliver Luck, who had been most recently with the XFL. And the XFL issues, he had nothing to do with those. In fact, COVID basically shut it down. And I think some form of the XFL may be coming back, actually, if the numbers get better between now and next spring. But he was in a position within the NCAA when he left to go work for the XFL that Mark Emmert could have used him properly to be in a position to make a difference with his NCAA post, and Mark wouldn't allow that to happen. He had no juice. The commissioners could give him the juice. And again, we're not talking about commissioners giving up any of their power. We're talking about them allowing themselves to at least come to terms with the fact that they don't have the time or the manpower to keep up with everything that's going on in the landscape of college football from time zone to time zone. Oliver could do all of that. Oliver could bring the Big Ten up to speed on what the ideas of Greg Sankey and Bob Bowlesby and John Swafford are, or vice versa. He could do all of that. Be a communications satellite, if you will, for those that are already in power. He wouldn't have anything to do with negotiating television rights for the conferences. Commissioners hold on to that right. But I do think that when it comes to the college football playoff, when it comes to making big decisions for making the sport bigger, broader, and better, he would have an incredible understanding of that, because college sports for many years, even with all the money, Roger, that's come in the last few years from ESPN and from the company I work for, Fox, they've left a lot of money on the table. I mean, a lot of money. College sports could be doing so much better if college football had expanded to 8 as opposed to 4. If there were more inventory and bringing in more involvement from other parts of the country besides just the Sun Belt. College football has been too reliant on the Big Ten and the SEC footprints for its financial success. They need to spread that out and get the rest of the country as involved. There's an old saying, a hardcore fan is going to be passionate no matter what. It's those on the periphery we need to get involved. And I think the West Coast and really west of the Red River, really, once you get out of Texas, west of Texas, the sport really does take a hit. And the Northeast has never been as involved in college football as it needs to be. And there are ways to do that. There are ways to get the Northeast more involved, just from a betting standpoint. With the ability now for people to place bets just about anywhere. College football needs greater inventory, and I think the opportunities for them to make, I don't know how much more than they're currently making, Azar could help them with in a very large way.
Of course, it's going to be a big effort to play college football this year, and we're certainly hoping, again, we see some more good news over the next few weeks, and the SEC, all these other conferences are able to play a normal schedule. But as you kind of look at that and talking about the periphery of college football, what's your level of concern right now for maybe, say, the group of 5 schools or a lot of the conferences that are postponing until spring football? I mean, this could dramatically change the landscape of college football. What could happen this fall? I mean, it's going to reverberate for a long time.
Hey, you like this? My phone's ringing. It's Bruno Mars. I have Bruno Mars on my.
You're worldwide, Timmy B.
I thought I turned that thing down. I apologize.
Very good.
As for the group of 5, they are in incredible peril, and I'm really worried about teams in the Mountain West, Sun Belt, and Conference USA. To give people an idea, the annual budgets of the teams involved in the Sun Belt range from, say, $17 million on the low end to about $35 million on the high end. About a third of that operating budget is based on what? Scholarships for all sports. If those schools in Conference USA and the Sun Belt in particular, who are tied strongly to the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12. If they don't get to play their games, they lose in the neighborhood of $2.5, $3, maybe more $1 million this year. That could be the death nail to a program that's operating budget is $17 million. It could contribute to mass slashing of sports, and maybe even a reduction to the FCS level from the FBS at a lot of other schools. None of that is good. And if you're the SEC and the ACC and you're only playing 8 conference games, what are you trying to do financially? You're trying to get a 7th home game every year. Well, if you're only playing 8 conference games, how in the world are you going to get a 7th home game if you've just run a third or a quarter of the programs at the Division I FBS level out of business? You need them to be in business so that you can schedule a few of those games to complete your seventh game. Now, I know fans, Roger, this is a lot of times if you're in Alabama, you got fans like pissed off that they don't even want to go to that game. They're like wondering why it's even on the schedule. Well, it's on the schedule because you're running a big time $1 billion business. And having that home game allows a lot of people to go to Bryant-Denny Stadium that ordinarily would never get a chance to go to Bryant-Denny Stadium. And those unbelievable waterfalls inside Nick Saban's palace are built on the basis of having a lot of home games. All right. And that slide in Dabo Sweeney's office to take his guys from the locker room down to the weight room, that's there for a reason. They play that extra home game. They need those games to be played. So I think it's something that the commissioners of those leagues really genuinely have in mind. I don't think it's the top priority. The health and safety and the well-being of the student athlete is still paramount, and taking care of themselves and their non-revenue producing sports is also important. And believe me, a lot of those non-revenue producing sports, if college football isn't played, there will be mass slashes, even at the Michigans, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the LSUs. There'll be mass slashes. So there's concern there. As it relates to the leadership of these conferences that are in the Group of Five, really the only one that I think we could honestly say would survive is the American Athletic Conference. And the reason is they've got a deal that over time is $1 billion deal with a B. Now, it's a longer contract, but it is a contract with a linear network in ESPN. They have that. The other leagues don't. Conference USA is playing some games on the NFL network for a song. Other games are being handled by syndicators out of Kansas City just to get games on in their home markets. They don't have, the television revenues are in the hundreds of thousands, not millions per team in those leagues. So they desperately need those games, those so-called money games with the big conference schools to be in place in order for them to survive. And again, as I said, I know fans don't necessarily have to care about that, but trust me when I tell you, the landscape of college football without those schools participating is going to be impacted at catastrophic levels. We're going to be talking about, well, can only schedule what we can schedule, and these teams, they're not in the business of football anymore. That's what I'm fearful of. The loss of revenue from the NCAA tournament, compounded with the potential loss of revenue of an entire college football season, and maybe even basketball. We haven't even gone there yet. Right. We can't get football off the ground. How are these schools going to get basketball going? I guess you could look at the bubble in the TPT and NBA and say, well, maybe. But, we're talking about financial ruin lying ahead. And that's the part that is really, you bring that up, Roger, now, and you're immediately, the blowback is immediate. Well, the health and well-being, and now all of a sudden you lack humanity. Like, my bringing that up means I'm all about revenue and economics and not about human life. We got to get the conversation past that. We have to somehow get past that reality. I think the administrators know what they want to do in 2 or 3 weeks, but they can't afford to say it now because the optics are so bad with the numbers spiking in 41 states that they are going to just get blowback the likes of which they've never seen. So they're all scared to say anything right now. But we got to make it. Somebody in a position of power has got to make a decision. Either you don't play, you take the hit, you understand that college football will never be the same. You're going to run a lot of teams and schools out of the business of college football. Either make that decision or understand that we've got to find a way to be able to have football in a COVID-19 environment. that COVID-19, even with the treatment that we have available, even with the potential vaccine that we don't know exactly what it is, but it may be forthwith, maybe coming shortly, we got to learn to fight through it, to have the games played. They don't look or feel the same, but they are played. People can watch them, just as they've watched golf without a gallery, MLS without fans. We'll be watching baseball without fans, and we'll be watching NBA without. We got to find a way for someone to be courageous enough to step up and say, either we're shutting it down or we're going to play through the COVID-19 climate that we're in. Who's that going to be? Who's it going to be?
Yeah. Well, before the pandemic, a lot of people would have pointed to Alabama along with the likes of Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia as being some early favorites to get to the playoff this year. Mm-hmm. Now, with all the pandemic that's happened, with all the variables we could see this season, just what are your thoughts on this Crimson Tide football team, and also knowing that they have one of the best leaders you can possibly have in Nick Saban to try and weather a situation like this?
Well, I don't know of anybody better with crisis management than Nick. The situation with this season right now is it only strengthens the big boys, and it weakens those that are trying to be but aren't. The distance between where Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Georgia, Ohio State, I'd even throw in maybe this year because they returned so much talent. Minnesota, they got a Heisman Trophy candidate, I think, potentially at quarterback. Those programs that were really good last year that returned a lot of talent, and the ones that have, like LSU as an example, they're top 10, but they're not considered, a team to back it up with 14 guys that are gone that were vital. But in all those first-round draft picks, all 5 of them, but I think they're still going to be really good, and they got a lot of talent and more. This is when they last won a national championship, they did not have the kind of recruiting to back that up to be able to sustain itself, the likes of which they have now. So I still think LSU is a major, major factor. But specifically to the point, all of those teams, and I don't care who the quarterback is. I don't. Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Auburn, Florida in the SEC are your top teams. And it's going to be harder for those teams that are behind them to play catch up. And I think in the Big Ten, you get a similar story with Ohio State. I think Penn State is probably taking the biggest step to beat Ohio State with the talent. Again, Franklin's done a great job recruiting. I think Minnesota, because of the division they're in, could probably repeat and be in that position. For Penn State, they got to beat Ohio State to get there, to get to the promised land. Got to find a way to beat them. The Big 12 has got, I think, in Baylor, a team that is legit, even with its new coach coming from LSU. They got a chance to compete at a very high level, in my estimation. And but I mean, it's basically Oklahoma's world, and everybody else is just invited into it. Texas, pound for pound, should be, but with everything going on there, the unrest they've had in Austin, who knows what to possibly expect there. But, honestly, you're right. At this time of year, normally I would have given you my preseason top 10, and people would be, throwing stones at me and it. And I can't tell you, Roger, how much I miss the Brando bashing from Bama fans on Twitter after I put out my preseason top 10. I long for that kind of tweet. I never thought that would be the case. But with everything that's been going on since March the 12th this year, man, I would lap up a few of those. Brando, you ignorant slut tweets. I'm missing those.
I bet. And speaking of things you're missing, of course, around this time of the year, you'd probably have a good idea of your first couple of assignments with Fox Sports. And, of course, we love watching you a lot of times with the late West Coast games you get to do after Alabama plays. But just from the planning that you're getting ready to do for whatever college football season will look like, what's that planning like for you right now?
Just got off the phone yesterday with our coordinating producer at Fox, and as we were discussing it, we're having to make decisions and adjustments and contingencies based on COVID as well. Uh, if you've ever been in a television truck at an SEC game at Bryant Denny or uh, at the Coliseum for basketball, you know that those guys are stacked in there like sardines on two different decks. It'll take, uh, with the same amount of personnel, two trucks to do what one truck used to do. And I think in a lot of cases, what they're going to try to do is use one truck, have a number of our technical people that would generally be on site be someplace else, whether that's in Charlotte or Los Angeles or different locations where we have production compounds, to lessen the concerns for social distancing more than anything else for those that are on site. In the booth, by example, I would normally have a talent stats person to my left, a spotter to my right between Spencer and me, helping me with, who tipped the ball, who forced the fumble, all that. Well, now we're having to make decisions on which one of those is more essential. Would it be the talent stats or would it be the spotter? For me, it would be a spotter. Down and distance is something that I still believe it's a primary for me. Ball carrier goes 8 yards, that sets up 2nd and 2. I almost do that habitually. But still, having stats is important. Long touchdown pass thrown, and you immediately know the yardage on it. When you're in the middle of calling it, you don't automatically remember what the yardage was. It's good to know. We can have stats done from a remote location, virtually. It can be done that way. So we're likely to do it, at least in my case. That's the decision I've made. And I think that's the major concerns. The health guidelines, public health guidelines are different at different places. If it's in Utah, it may be one way. If it's in Texas or Oregon, it could be something different. So our crews have to be mindful of what the public health guidelines and the county health guidelines are at different locations. I think there'll be a lot of plexiglass between us, maintaining 6 feet distance between myself and Spencer. It's doable, and it's even doable with a spotter there. But these booths, as you know, in a lot of college towns, it's not like the NFL where they constructed all the press boxes with national TV in mind. A lot of these college booths are small and cramped. So, we have to make adjustments from game to game and site to site. We don't know where we're going to be yet. We were hopeful that we might have known right about now. Originally we were going to find out. We usually find out in the 1st of June. We were then told we'd find out mid-July. Now, because of the situation and the schedules being in upheaval, we won't know until really the first week of August at the earliest. And then when we find out, it's like, be ready, because no sooner than you get your games, you could be on your way to a game by September 5. I suspect, though, this is just my guess, that with these models that we're hearing about that the SEC discussed, the so-called 8-2 model you may have read about, that they've got in mind either pushing the season back, to September 19th from September 5, or in certain cases, maybe playing September 5 with the understanding that they may have a game on the 12th or the 19th that they're moving, or not play for whatever reason. That they cannot play all of their non-conference games, but they want to play some of them. So that may be in play as well. I still think that another way to potentially, everyone's looking at cost cutting too, because everybody's taking a hit. I mean, everybody's taking a financial hit. I do believe, though, that we will all be at the game sites, which is good. I mean, everything was on the table. I mean, the notion of me being up here in my study calling a football game on national TV, I
You just
didn't
turn around your seat
necessarily
right there. We see the TV. Yeah, you'd be doing that.
trying to wrap my arms around that one, like Boog does on Korean baseball. I don't know that I could. I don't know that I could pull that one off. But uh, I would certainly hope that maybe what it means is our locations. Like Spencer lives in Houston. I live in Shreveport. We're 5 hours apart. We have the Big Ten is not going to play for 3 weeks, so that eliminates going there. Um, uh, the potential of us doing games, I think, in closer proximity to where we are might be in play, which would mean a little more Big 12 for us, and a little more Pac-12 maybe for other guys that are, living out in LA and Seattle. We'll see. Nothing's in stone, but I think just trying to make it as convenient and less expensive as possible. Anything that can be done to do that and still bring the content the way it needs to be brought is important to the networks right now. And when I say the networks, I mean primarily ESPN and Fox, because we together we own the majority of college football. The Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 schedules are done by lottery between the programmers of ESPN and Fox. So they are in constant conversation with one another about the choice of games from week to week. And it generally starts with picking the first 3 weeks. And then after that, they pick 12 days out, Monday week for a game, not the next Saturday, but the Saturday after that. So they have to be working collaboratively, and that much we're sure of. The SEC and CBS is an isolated game. Notre Dame and NBC is an isolated game. Everything else pretty much is a ESPN or Fox entity. So that's what's all on the table, at least at this stage.
All right, we'll get you out on this. Of course, you talked about some of your play-by-play travels that you've had and what could be coming up for you, but let's go back a little bit to some of your favorite travels to Tuscaloosa or to Legion Field in Birmingham, and some of your favorite Alabama football memories. Any quick, fun story you can share with us?
Oh, God, Roger, so many. Some might not be Alabama fans' favorite memories, but there were certainly some incredible moments. I ran across a guy on, everybody's looking back and gets nostalgic during this pandemic. And a guy sent me a YouTube call of mine, a Matt Wyatt touchdown pass for Mississippi State beating Alabama by a point back in '97. I had already started working at CBS, but I had not started the studio yet. I was doing probably 7 or 8 CBS games and 6 or 7 Jefferson Pilot games that year. It just so happened I was working with Charles Davis on that game. It was only the second game Charles had ever called. Now Charles is doing the NFL on CBS. He was with Fox with Gus when I started, and moved over to the NFL with Kevin Burkhardt. J.J. Metters caught a pass from Barry Lunny of Arkansas. Danny Ford came back to Bryant Denny to beat Alabama in a game that everyone thought Metters didn't catch the ball. They thought it was trapped right at the goal line. Oh, there were a lot of Alabama fans pissed. And I was leaving, they were like, "Brando, did he catch it? He didn't catch it." I was like, "Well, no." And they were like, "Shut up." So I got a lot of that. Gene Stallings was just such a joy to work with, and he was coaching when I was coming in there a lot. And Freddie Kitchens, of all people, was his quarterback. You might recall back then. I got to know Gene, and I visited with him a couple of times. You've seen that old picture of Coach Stallings and his son John Mark sleeping on the couch there in the office, the offices at the Capstone. And I was there one night with Dave Rowe, Disco Dave, my old buddy, Uncle Dave. We did those Jefferson Pilot games. And John Mark was really excited to see us, but he was clearly getting sleepy, and we were having our production meeting, and he fell asleep on that very couch where that picture was taken. I think somebody did a painting of it, which was really a cool painting to see. Um, and also coming to Tuscaloosa also meant a visit to Dreamland. And going into Dreamland, especially with someone that had never been there, like, a graphics operator or um, somebody on the technical staff, maybe you had a new director, and you go in there, and I'm talking about the old Dreamland, the original in T-Town, just outside T-Town, driving through the woods to get there. And you go in, and I would play a joke on whoever the newbie was, and I'd say, "Yeah, the steaks are great. They also have wonderful salads." I'd set the guy up. They also have great salads. I mean, to me, when you go into a great restaurant, you can always tell it's wonderful by the salad. Guy goes in, sits down, and says, "So, Tim was telling me about that salad. I'd love to have whatever I loved your salad." And I'm trying to remember the old gentleman's name. He's no longer with us now. That ran the place. God, I wish I remembered his name. Big, heavy-set guy. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "You never been here before, have you? You never been here?" I said, "No, sir, but Mr. Brando has here." He said, "Well, he knows better than that. We have bread, we have ribs, and we have beer. Bread, ribs, and beer." He said, "You don't like that? You don't need to be here."
No need for the salad.
I will never forget that. One night, and this isn't an Alabama memory, but it's a memory of being in Tuscaloosa. We were doing a game in Birmingham for the Stallions of the USFL, long before you were born. Mm-hmm. Joe Cribbs of Auburn was the running back. Cliff Stout was the quarterback. Joey Jones, the coach at South Alabama, Alabama legend, played for Bear in the early 80s, was a wide receiver for that team. Paul McGuire, the great Paul McGuire, who I've always said was John Madden without a video game. He was one of the great, most underrated color analysts in the history of college football or the NFL. I mean, he was all over ESPN in the early days, and 1985 was the year I started, so we're talking 35 years ago. I went in to that was the first time I'd ever been in to Dreamland. And they all knew Paul because Paul had been coming in the year before with Jim Simpson. ESPN didn't even have the rights to do the games live, but they would come in and do Alabama games on tape delay, and they'd air them on Sundays. And so he'd come in, and they went to Dreamland twice, and they didn't eat anywhere else. We're going to eat there the day before the game, and then when the game's over, they're staying open. We're going to go to the game after. We're going to go there after that. So I went in there in '85 with him. We drove from Birmingham all the way to Tuscaloosa specifically to go to Dreamland, and they had an Igloo ice chest of beer set up at our table solely for Paul. Paul's. Everybody else can get like a mug. He gets an Igloo ice chest of beer. Mr. McGuire, this is all yours. Boom. And he's knocking them back. Pretty soon he had built a mountain of beer cans. He would drink it, crush it up. It was absolutely unbelievable. And I remember Fred Godelli was our associate director. Fred now produces NFL Sunday Night Football for NBC. He does the biggest show in NFL football. And Fred was younger than me, and I was 29, so Fred was like 25, maybe 26. He's like, "Paul, really? Really? You're going to do that? Really?" Well, yeah. These are all mine. You can have yours. No, you're not getting my beer. My beer is in this Igloo ice chest. It was just amazing, and so much fun that we had. I mentioned that game with Mississippi State and Alabama. That game was in Tuscaloosa, and when the game was over, after Mississippi State had won it, Larry White, the old sports information director at Alabama, he had a couple of the cops, a couple of the campus police officers were set up and ready to go. It's amazing what you can get with a few hats, with a few Jefferson Pilot SEC hats. And I was trying to make a flight so I could get home, and it was an 11:30 game. I think my flight was at maybe 4:40, and the game ended at like 3:30. And without that escort out, I'm not going to make the flight. But they escorted us. What's the little town where the last exit is before you get to Tuscaloosa, going back towards Birmingham?
I got like Vance. Yeah, there are a bunch of little ones around there.
But this one has a hotel off to the left-hand side as you're driving out. I can't remember.
Okay, I'm blanking right now. Yeah,
it's the last exit before it used to be a Holiday Inn there. But it's the first exit past McFarland, okay?
Gotcha.
If you're driving, coming around the other way from the stadium, you'd still have to pass McFarland. All right, now you keep going, and the next exit, the police wave us off, and they're leaving. Now I've got the pedal down. Now I had become a member of the Alabama State Militia in 1986. I still have an Alabama State Militia card, and so I had the pedal down on that rental car, Roger, to about 95. And I'll never forget, Dave Buzz Baker was our sideline reporter. And Dave is like, Timmy B? I'm like, yeah. He says, we lost our escort. And I'll never forget, Charles to this day tells this story. And I turned around to Buzz and I said, yeah? So what? What do you mean? I said, no, we're making this flight. During my younger days, got to make the flight. Need to get home to mama.
That's right.
It was just, those great getaways are always, something special. But one last thing, in '86, before I was doing play-by-play at ESPN, before I even started doing game day. So, the '86 season, I had done the USFL in '85, but the '86 season, I was doing sidelines and kind of hosting from the site our big college football game. And that year, I think it was maybe the last year LSU and Alabama played at Birmingham. And it was Perkins coaching against Bill Archbarger. Tommy Hodson was the quarterback at LSU. LSU won the game, went on to win the SEC. And I'll never forget being there. And that night, it was the first time I got a hint that they were going to start when the game was over. I got a hint from our producer that they would be calling me up to maybe visit with the bosses about starting this little thing called College Game Day the following year in 1987. That happened that night in 1986 when LSU played Alabama. So I have a lot of memories from a career standpoint about trips into Tuscaloosa for football. And basketball, just as many. I mean, a lot of incredible games between Alabama and LSU, Alabama, and Mississippi State in college basketball. So I missed my little tours into T-Town. Trust me. They were lots and lots of fun.
Well, we look forward to having you back hopefully very soon, Tim, and just thank you for all the time you've given us over the last almost hour with some really passionate thoughts on what we need to see in college football moving forward. We love the memories as well. So just thank you again for your time, and again, hopefully we can catch up with you down the road.
Happy to do it, Roger. If you see that corner where McGuire was, they may have had to, I don't know what they did there. They had to do a lot of mopping that night at Dreamland.
I understand it. Timmy B, thank you, sir. We'll see you.
You bet.
All right.
You bet.
Thanks, fans, for watching the Crimson Tide Sports Network.